In June of 2007, in an Upper Canada College gymnasium, the grade 8 class wrote their art exam. And as part of that evaluation, the students were asked to interpret a portrait with which they were already familiar. It hangs in the hallway on the first floor of the memorial wing, and the boys pass it each time they visit the health center. It's the portrait of an older woman proudly wearing her nurse's uniform. During the exam, the young artist struggled to capture the essence of the painting and of the woman represented by it. Some students focused on her face and expression, others on the intriguing details of her uniform, the formal nurse's cap, the dramatic cape, the slightly incongruous red mittens, and the Remembrance Day poppy so prominently displayed where the cape folds back. Who was this woman? And why does her portrait have such pride of place in a 175-year-old institution? The portrait is of Miss Barbara Ann Barrow, UCC's head nurse from 1938 to 1980. And hers is the remarkable story of how a woman and a non-academic came to be one of the most enduring icons of a 175-year-old boys' school. To understand exactly how Miss B became such a beloved figure and a touchstone for so many students, teachers, and graduates, it is important to hear from those who respected, loved, and admired her for over half a century. Each promising artist in that grade 8 class captured a different facet of Miss Barrow, each one reflecting his own response to the portrait. So it is with each one of us who is fortunate enough to know her. Everyone has his own Miss B, a personal portrait drawn from shared experience and from the ways in which she touched our lives.
Barbara Barrow was born in 1908. Much of her youth was spent in northern Alberta, in the Athabasca River country, where her father was a local physician. She took up medicine at the Ottawa General Hospital, studying nursing, and then she went to practice nursing at the Hobina Native Reserve. This sounds like the perfect sort of person to go to a boys' school with that rugged background and take on the trials there.
My knowledge of Miss Barrow's life before her arrival at the college in 1938, I was always impressed by the fact, of course, that she had grown up on the Alaska Highway in a very tough conditions. Her father was a doctor in the Northwest Territories, northern British Columbia, and she had a remarkable fund of stories to tell about growing up in those circumstances. Well, I remember her telling me about doctors being paid in those days, and of course many of her father's patients weren't particularly wealthy, living as they did in very tough rural conditions, very isolated, and so she said it was not uncommon for the doctor's fees to be paid in game that had been hunted by some of his constituents, or chickens, or various other forms of tangible material, shall we say, other than money. Very much more simple kind of existence, I guess.
Miss B took graduate studies in nursing at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. At this time she was about 30. It was 1938, and Terry McDermott, our principal at Upper Canada, hired her to take on nursing duties there. It was just before the beginning of the Second World War.
Miss B worked at Upper Canada College as the school nurse for over 50 years, from 1938 to 1980. A good portion of the college's history, which dates back to 1829. Barbara Barrow continued her relationship to the school until she died in 1994. It's interesting that one of the most important people in our history, an icon, so to speak, is a woman, not a teacher, not an academic, but a woman who cared deeply for the boys of this college and for Upper Canada College itself.
I think the important thing about Miss Barrow for the college is that throughout her career, she was a great source of stability, encouragement, and enthusiasm to so many of our students. She arrived here just before the Second World War, and when the war broke out, it of course upset the college dramatically, as it upset the lives of so many students. Many of them left to go off in the armed forces, far from home. And she responded by writing to them in the hundreds, and they to her. And I think for many of them, she was a link to something that they knew, something that was familiar, something that made them think of home, was a comfort. I think the enthusiasm and happiness that she would have conveyed in her letters, her concern for them, would have been a great comfort. Similarly, I think through the destruction of the building in 1958, it is, of course, notable that the memorial wing where the infirmary was located was not destroyed, and this, I think, was really crucial because, again, Miss Barrow could operate in that area and provide for students an ongoing source of encouragement and brightness, sense of optimism for the future, and of course that was something we all know she had in her character, always trying to make the best of everything. This is one of the important things about Miss Barrow, that she was always an encourager. She was always somebody that gave kids a sense that they could go on, they could excel. She took pride in what they did, she conveyed that pride to them, and that, I think, was what made an extraordinary impact on so many students and on the college itself.
The main reason that Barbara Barrow was important to me, I think, came out of the war. We landed at the beach in Sicily in July of 1943, and I had just had my 23rd birthday. I was captured about a month later and was a prisoner of war in Germany for almost 2 years. During that time, she wrote regularly, and I had a sidekick whose name was Casey Corbett, who was also a Seaton's old boy, who was in the same prison camp I was in, and she wrote to him regularly and to me, and it was just wonderful. You bear in mind that she had only known us for a year, the fall of '38 to the spring of '39, when we left the school and went to university and then on to the war. And she must have had 500 or 600 or 1,000 old boys to write to, and she never missed writing to us. We couldn't write back very often because we were only given 4 postcards and 1 letter a month, as I recollect, by the Germans. And I think that whoever at Upper Canada picked Barbara Barrow to be the head nurse was an absolute genius. Many people wonder why Barbara Barrow commanded such affection and such respect. And over the years, so many of us look back with such great fondness on her. Well, I think it was a combination of, first of all, physically, she was very attractive. She was a nice-looking woman with that very dark brown or black hair. She was always most beautifully turned out. You never saw Barbara Barrow when she wasn't neat and tidy and nice-looking. She had great charm, she had courage, and she was never afraid of doing what was right. And one who left a lasting impression, well, for me, a lifelong impression, of course. I think her lasting legacy, it's terribly hard for me to judge, but when I came back from the war, for instance, just as an example, one of the very first things I did was go and visit Barbara Barrow, because that's the sort of thing that we all wanted to do. And she insisted that had I a picture that she could put on her wall, and for years my picture was on her wall in the room, and of course she changed from time to time, but she had, I suppose, 1,000 or 2,000 old boys pictures of to put on the wall. But her lasting influence surely must have been one of friendship above everything. She was a friend and a good friend of hundreds of young men, now old men as I am, and I still remember her with the greatest of affection.
For much of her time at the college, and certainly long after she stopped being the nurse, she continued to write a column in the Old Times called Notes from the Infirmary. She started them all by saying, "Dear old boy," not "dear old boys." That's the way she always was. She dealt with her boys individually, and she did. She had the ability to make each one seem special with her. And that is one of the great charms of Miss B.
I think the interesting thing is how she gave herself to the college. Most of the anecdotes that you hear about Miss B are based upon her total involvement with that school. She gave herself to the school, and she dealt with every individual on a personal basis, and that was unique. She expected people, incidentally, to give back to the college the same amount that she gave to the college. And she loved to deal with people on a one-to-one basis and expected them to give themselves to the institution. And that expectation led most of what I would call the Barrow boys at Upper Canada College to devote themselves to the traditions of Upper Canada College as she saw them. And that was her forte. And she loved that. I remember when there was a cricket match at the college at one point, and during the recess, the styrofoam cups came out to serve the cricketers tea in the mid-break, and Barrow ordered them all back into and made sure that there was proper china served to the cricket players because it was their tradition. And she did not like that kind of a tradition being changed. So tradition was very important to her.
I'm Hugh Smythe. I went to Upper Canada in the years 1940 to 1944 and got to know Miss Barrow as everybody did, as a presence seemingly everywhere. But I was quite healthy. Didn't get wounded on the football field or on the hockey rink, so that she had no professional reason to get involved in my care. And after I left Upper Canada, I'd see her when I returned to watch a football game or at some other function. But in my final year of medical school, I developed tuberculosis, a spot on my lung, which led to me being out of school for nearly a year. And she came to visit me out there long after I'd left the school and with no contact in the interval. She kept in contact with everybody. I think her ongoing legacy is going to be in the memories we have of her. She's stamped from a single mold. If you wanted to hire another Miss B, you could not. What was so spectacular about her, the technical word for it would be charisma, but I don't think that's rich enough. I'm still stuck with the limitations of the English language and my ability to articulate it. I guess all I can say in response is that every old boy I've ever talked to is willing to have a conversation about Miss Barrow at any time.
My father, for whom I'm named, was the doctor at Upper Canada College for 42 years. He and Miss Barrow started together in 1938, and he spent 42 years there with Miss Barrow. I've had more old boys come to me saying they've been stitched up by my dad and Miss Barrow than any other remembrance I've ever had at Upper Canada. My father was a very gentle man and a very good doctor, and they worked well together to perform their magic. I think her secret to her being so well loved by so many old boys is and was her ability to engage us immediately in everything that we were involved with. So she was there to physically look after us, but also psychologically. And she knew exactly what every boy was doing, how well they were doing it, how poorly they were doing it, and would remind them to do well and to improve their play, improve their ability to become victorious, to win, to defeat the enemy, to take on the duties of life, I think. That's what she did. And the Miss Barrow letters, the dear old boy, and trying to keep in touch as if she was a great aunt or a special person. That's what made her so wonderful.
When boys were sick in the infirmary or were banged up on the sports field, often Miss B would have to call their families and explain what was going on. Such was the case in our family. Miss B called so often, I think because of problems with sports or injuries, that she and my mother became good friends. When we would have family events, often Miss B would get included. This carried on long after my days at Upper Canada. My mother and Miss B were good friends, and indeed Miss B was our honorary grandmother to my kids long after my mother had died. Miss B just stayed in the family. When I've told this story to other old boys, they've said, that's not very unique. Miss B has always been involved in our families too, and that was the kind of person that she was.
When I went back to the school in 1987 for 3 years as principal, I was very disappointed that she'd retired. And one of our major challenges at that point in time was a major capital campaign called Renaissance 21. And I just felt that one of the major challenges that we had was to reach out to the old boys. The bridge that we needed to build a strong old boy community had to do with Barrow intervening and reaching out, whether it was in Bermuda or Shanghai or wherever. Barrow was ahead of me when we came off the plane, and the old boys wanted to see her, and we had some wonderful meetings and strengthened significantly that old boy community, and it was Barrow that did it. She's an old boy, and she's the only female old boy we ever had. We used to introduce her that way. I used to take her out on these old boy trips. I go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, and she'd still be drinking in the bar with guys at 1 or 2 in the morning. Why? Because she could keep up with them in her 70s, and they loved her.
There are so many stories about Miss Barrow, but my favorite story, which came near the end of her career here at the college, she was walking down the hall carrying a tray of medication to be administered to a student who was ill, and she tripped and fell, and determined to protect the medication, she managed to fall in such a way as to break her own wrist rather than lose the medication. This, I think, is just typical in a small way of the kind of dedication and absolute devotion that she demonstrated throughout her career at the college.
When I was selling soap on the prairies after graduating from school, I was in a small prairie town, and I noticed the bus that said National Youth Orchestra on it. So I wandered into the motel beside the bus because I knew Miss B would be there. She served in the summers when the school was not in session as the nurse to the National Youth Orchestra. When I walked in, I didn't get a, wow, nice to see you in this strange place, Tim. I got, Carter, we need your car. Our bassoonist has had an appendectomy attack and we got to get him to a hospital. Let's move it. Fine. Yes, Miss B. That exemplified her. She loved her boys and she would look after them anywhere.
I think there's no question that as a person very interested in history, that Miss Barrow had the most extraordinary interest in the history of the college and in the students, and was in herself a living history work. And I think that I would be proud to say to her that I tried to maintain some of that and pass on some of it to others. I think because institutions like this are about people and are living institutions, and one has to maintain these stories, these characters, the characterizations are so important. And if we lose that, I think in a school we lose an awful lot. And I think Miss Barrow so much typified the pictures on her walls in her apartment of students, the letters by the thousands. All of these things were an incredible part of maintaining not just a tradition, but an institutional memory, and maintaining values and concepts that we would like to preserve far into the future.
Behind me are the UCC archives. This is our major storage area, and Miss B's collection of records takes up most of that collection. In fact, it takes up 72 linear feet, which, if each box was placed end to end on the football field, it would take up about a quarter of the field. This collection is really important to UCC because it documents 50 years of our history, 50 years that might otherwise have been lost, and 50 years of change in this institution. Just imagine what our infirmary was then. Miss B was the nurse, she was the sports therapist, she was the psychologist. Now at the college, we have different people to do all those functions.
The legacy that Miss B leaves is really two of them. The first is the memories that she's given to hundreds, if not thousands, of old boys, and they will remain as long as the old boys are here. The enduring one, however, deals with a foundation which she set up shortly before she died. Her plan was to leave a part of her estate to benefit, in terms of scholarships, to boys to attend the school. A group of old boys who knew her have set forth the criteria which we thought she would have picked for the selection of those boys to receive scholarships. It includes, it's a need-based scholarship, so there is a value in terms of providing funds where boys would not otherwise attend the school. Secondly, the boys who go to the school have to be clearly benefiting from the school and enjoying school life. They as well would be the kind of boys which Miss B would have seen. That means there'd be a high proportion of them would be involved in athletic endeavors and contributing back to the school. I might say that over the 12 years since that foundation has been giving out scholarships, we have had some wonderful boys who have fitted all those criteria and have gone on conspicuously to do great things at university and beyond.
Hi, I'm J.P. Mackay, and I graduated from UCC in 2002. During my time here, I was a Barrow Scholar. Since graduating from the college, I've joined the foundation as a trustee. I'm very grateful to both the foundation and Miss B for providing me with an opportunity to attend UCC. I remember the day that I received word that I'd been admitted into the school. It was pretty exciting. And I thought my father would be pretty excited, considering he taught here for 10 years during the 1980s. So I eagerly waited for him to return home from work. And I remember when he finally came home, I raced down and I told him that I'd been accepted. And I thought he'd be pretty excited. While he was happy, he knew that on their own, my parents wouldn't be able to send me to the school. I told him the amount that the school offered, and while it was certainly substantial, it wouldn't be enough to provide me with the opportunity to attend the school. I strongly believe that it hadn't been for the Barrow Foundation, I wouldn't have been able to attend UCC, and I wouldn't have been able to benefit from all the opportunities that I enjoyed while at the school during my 4 years here. Miss B has a number of legacies here at the school, but the one that will live on forever is the Barrow Foundation in providing students like me an opportunity to attend UCC, and in creating a network of past Barrow scholars all over the world in a variety of fields. Collectively, we are ensuring that the legacy of Miss B and her memory live on at UCC.
The legacy of Barbara Barrow can be found all over Upper Canada College, from her portrait on the main floor to her name on the quarter-century board, and the collection that she left to the UCC archives that's used in the curriculum of the college and is often on display in the front hall. The Barrow Scholarship, which allows several young men each year to attend this college, and the rowing shell that was donated in her honor. I'm sitting here on Barrow's bench, a wonderful area of the school that was donated by several admiring old boys. The plaque reads, "We dedicate this place, the site of Barrow's bench, a place of rest and of reflection upon the college, a little on the outside looking in, remembering Miss B, who was the touchstone for many of us. She thought her boys were special, and we think Barbara Barrow was very special." This plaque was dedicated on October 1st, 1994.
Of course, it's not only the great honor, the intense interest, the amazing collection of men that study, staff, and take care of the college. I have always been an extremely proud part to you all. Thank you.